Hello, everyone. I'm Janice Masood Paul, librarian for Health Sciences Research, and welcome to Comparing PubMed with Ovid MEDLINE Searching. So this webinar will briefly describe PubMed and Ovid MEDLINE databases. We're going to compare search features, the advantages and disadvantages of searching each user interface. What this is not is an in-depth webinar for searching either tool. Can't do that in 30 minutes. But if you're interested, I'll make sure that I add links to resources and videos on this slide deck with a little bit more detailed searching information. So look for that to be posted on our website. First, I just want to go over a couple of definitions so that we're all on the same page. Medline. That is a free biomedical database of citations from the National Center for Biotechnology Information and the National Library of Medicine. And again, it's free, it's paid for with your taxpayer dollars. PubMed is the platform that NCBI and NLM use to search Medline and a few other resources, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Ovid MEDLINE is a commercial platform for searching Medline. And then finally, there's PubMed Central. That's a free repository or archive of full text documents that are reviewed by the National Library of Medicine. And if you have written a grant that was funded by the NIH, there's a good chance that your publication is also archived in PubMed Central, even if it's not in a journal that's indexed in Medline. So a lot of things in there. So now what is actually in PubMed? As I've already mentioned, Medline is in PubMed, and it includes the mesh thesaurus. That's just a thesaurus of subject terms that are used in Medline. You could think of it like tags in social media, except it's used for the Medline database. You'll also find things like in-process citations and ahead of print records. In-process citations are those citations that haven't been indexed with subject headings yet. And the ahead of print records are records that are in an e-format, but they aren't in a print publication yet. Along with that are some other citations to life science journals that just aren't indexed by Medline. So that's what you'll find in PubMed. And then in Ovid MEDLINE, again, there's the Medline database. There are records that came out before Medline, so things before in 1946, and all of those in process and ahead of print records that I mentioned earlier. So you might notice a pattern here. I really want to emphasize that PubMed MEDLINE and Ovid MEDLINE, they're both Medline. It's basically the same content. So if you're a student and you have an assignment that says you have to use, I don't know, 3 health sciences databases, you can't use PubMed and Ovid MEDLINE. They're basically the same database. So choose one or the other. The one that you choose, though, really depends upon what it is you're trying to do, because the difference isn't in the content, the difference is in the user interface. So let me say a little bit about the advantages of using one resource or another. One of the main advantages, of course, to using PubMed is that it's free. So even after you're not part of the Drexel community, after you've graduated or you've moved on to another university, as a faculty member, you can always search PubMed. It also has a relatively friendly user interface, and part of that is based on its algorithm. So PubMed's search algorithms can simplify a search because when you do the basic search in PubMed, it's going to include the subject headings, variant word spellings, and I'll mention this again, but if you are searching a term where they use British English or American English, like color, for example, it's going to automatically search for both versions of that. It'll search for alternative endings and so on. So here's a little example here on this slide. If I just search for a keyword or phrase like cervical cancer, It'll search for cervical cancer, but it'll also automatically search for any subject heading associated with it. It'll search for the phrase cervical cancer, and it'll search for those terms across different fields within the record. So it really helps you to do a relatively complex search, even if you're a novice. So those are some of the advantages of using PubMed. Now, Ovid MEDLINE is sort of on the other end of a continuum. Ovid MEDLINE's proximity and truncation really allows for more precise searching. So it's a great tool to use if you're doing a complex or comprehensive search. They have something called an adjacency operator. It's a way of indicating the proximity between one search term and another. So in this example, we use the ADJ, or adjacency operator, but we actually specify that we want cognitive and therapy to occur up to within 2 words of each other. So that's going to retrieve cognitive therapy, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and even therapy on cognitive function, because it doesn't necessarily matter the order of those terms. In addition to those adjacency operators, it also allows you to use truncation and wildcards to search for a specific number of letters after your root term. And the example I have here is using the word disease as a root. And then I have the $sign. You can also use an asterisk like you do in PubMed. That's the truncation option. So this is going to search for the word disease and diseases and diseased, or anything after that E. You can also specify that you only want it within 2 letters. So while vaccine, $2 is going to retrieve vaccine and vaccines, it's not going to retrieve vaccination because that's more than 2 letters. You can use internal wildcards as well as specific internal wildcards, and that's really helpful when you're looking for word variations. Again, those British and American English spellings, or for an example like this, where you want both women and woman, the singular, because there's only 1 letter that's being substituted. I'll show you this when I actually do a search online, but it's a little bit easier within Ovid to build on your search lines and edit your searches as well as document them. I'm going to do a demonstration search. In adult women, does the HPV vaccine prior to human papillomavirus exposure reduce the rate of cervical cancer compared to a placebo? Again, this is not a search on developing a good search strategy. This is just an example of a search that I'm going to do. So I could probably build this search out a little bit more, but I'm going to keep it simple just for the purposes of demonstration. And I'm going to be looking in the advanced version of PubMed and Ovid MEDLINE. I thought I would show you what this search looked like first before we went live, so I can tell you what I'm doing in advance. So I'm going to look for all of the terms I can find, both keyword and subject headings that are related to cervical cancer, which is this part of the search. And then I'm going to look for terms that are related to the HPV vaccine, which is this part of the search. And I'm going to combine those 2 concept clusters together to find articles that talk about cervical cancer and the HPV vaccine. Afterwards, I'm going to be doing a little bit of limiting. So this is the search in PubMed, and this is the search in Ovid. And you can see it looks a little bit simpler, even though it's basically the same search. If you're using Ovid MEDLINE or PubMed at Drexel, you can get there in 2 ways. You can either use databases A to Z and look it up alphabetically, or you can go to the Health Sciences resource link, which is what we're going to be doing. And then you'll see both of those databases under research resources. So let's go ahead and go live. Give me 1 second. So we've gone from our library website to the Health Sciences resource page, and here's a duplicate screen print here. I'm going to start with PubMed. This is the PubMed basic search page, and many of you are probably pretty comfortable with this page already, but we're going to be doing an advanced search. And as I mentioned earlier, before we get started on the search, I want to look for both subject headings and keywords. To find my subject headings, I'm going to look in the list of medical subject headings. So this is the mesh thesaurus that I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to click on that and then look for cervical cancer to see what subject headings they're using. When I enter cervical cancer in this thesaurus, it gives me a list of options I could choose, but this is really the one I'm looking for, this uterine cervical neoplasms. I'll bring this page up. I'm not going to go into it in any detail, but just to show you what the page looks like and how I can select the subject heading. Here's my subject heading with a description. There are some subheadings listed here in case I wanted to narrow this further, but I'm not going to be taking advantage of these for this search. And then if I continue to scroll down, it will show you the subject heading and its relationship to other subject headings you can use. Some of them in this case are broader. We're just going to stick with this uterine cervical neoplasms for now. I'm going to click on Add to my search builder and search for this in PubMed. It'll give me the search result for just that subject heading. And I'm going to move on to the advanced page now to add some of my other keyword options. So here we are with the first search line with the uterine cervical neoplasms, my subject heading, and I'm going to search for the keyword for cervical cancer as well. So let's add this to the search history. And when I search for cervical cancer as a keyword, again, I'm getting a lot more results here. The main reason is because of that algorithm happening in the background. If I want to see what's happening, I can click on search details. And you can see the example that I showed you earlier, where it's looking for that medical subject heading that we already pulled up and other places where this term appears across different fields. So it's giving you a lot of mileage just on that keyword search. But there's one other variation that I'd like to do. And I don't see anything about cancer of the cervix listed here. And I want to make sure I capture records that have that phrase that maybe haven't been indexed yet. So to do that, I'm going to put in the phrase cancer of the cervix here. And I'm going to look for this as a text word. When you're searching in PubMed and you use the advanced search, you can tell it where to find those words. A common place to look is in the title or the abstract. The text word is a little bit broader, so that will look for items in the title, in the abstract field, as a keyword, and other places where you might find this as a subject. So let's add this to our query box and then add it to our search history. So there are a few other records that we're pulling up. And I looked for this a little bit earlier. There's some overlap here, but not a lot. So a lot of these are going to be unique unique records. Now I'm just going to combine all of these. So I have one concept cluster dealing with cancer of the cervix, and then we're going to combine that with the HPV vaccine. So in order to combine these together, I'm just going to add them to my query box, but I'm going to use the OR operator to make sure that all of these are being considered. And I'll have my largest search set of 121,469 records. Again, there's a little overlap here, but this takes care of the overlap. So these are all unique records. Now I want to add in anything dealing with the HPV vaccine. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and look in the thesaurus at my subject headings. I'll add HPV vaccine here. The subject heading is papillomavirus vaccines. If I scroll down, it will show me papillomavirus vaccines, but there's also a more narrow subject heading I can use. This is not my subject area of expertise, so I'm not quite sure if this is going to be too narrow. I'm going to stick with papillomavirus vaccines, but I'll make sure that I include this more narrow subject heading in my search. And in PubMed, it will do that by default. I don't have to select anything. As a matter of fact, if I wanted to make sure this was not included, if I scroll up, I would select don't include mesh terms found below this in the hierarchy, but I'm just going to stick with the broad term and items that are more narrow beneath it. So let's add this to the search builder and click on Search PubMed. So here's my subjects heading search on HPV vaccines. I'm going to do a keyword search on the same thing. I'm going to take advantage of that truncation symbol. So it will find vaccine, vaccines, vaccination, and so on. I'll look for it as a text word, add it to my query box. And so now I have two sets dealing with HPV. I'm going to combine those with an OR. So here are my HPV records, HPV vaccine records, which I'm going to combine with my cervical cancer records. So to do that, I will just add that to the query and make sure this time, since I want the intersection of those records, I'm going to use an AND. At this point, I could just filter my search to find the information that I was looking for. I want to point out that this is the entire search. So I could just copy and paste this, let's say, into a basic search box and come up with the same thing. But it's a little more difficult to decipher this search because of the parentheses and whatnot. Let's look at my records. I'll click on the results set. I'm going to apply a couple of filters. Let's see. Let's look for the last 5 years. I'm going to, since I was interested in women 19 to 44, I'm going to apply that filter as well. We'll look for items in English. And I'm looking for studies. So let's look at randomized controlled trials. Okay. So I have 43 results that would probably meet my search strategy pretty well. I'm going to do the same search quickly within Ovid. Let's change to the Ovid database. see. Go here. Oops. All right, back to health sciences. We're going to go into Ovid MEDLINE. And when you use Ovid MEDLINE, the first screen that you get will give you the option of choosing different databases that are covered by the Ovid platform. The closest one to searching PubMed is this first one, Ovid MEDLINE from 1946 to 2022. Don't worry, you can always narrow your search. It will automatically come up to a basic Ovid search. I never search the basic search. So let's go ahead and select advanced. When you select advanced, it'll give you the ability to map to a subject heading. So I'm going to take advantage of that and just put in cervical cancer. Click on search. There's my uterine cervical neoplasms here. When I select this, this is exactly the same thing that I get when I'm searching PubMed, even though it doesn't look like it. So here is my subject heading here. There's nothing indented beneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on continue. It gives me my subheadings on another page. I'm not interested in subheadings here. I'll click on continue. And I have my first search set with the subject headings. I'm now going to look for keywords. So I'll look for cervical cancer. I'm going to look at them in specific fields, just like I did in PubMed. In this case, I'm looking in the text word field, which looks in the title and the abstract. So it's slightly different than the text word field in PubMed. And I'm going to look for it in the keyword field as well. And then finally, I'm going to do that search where I'm looking for cancer of the cervix, but it's going to look a little bit different. So I'll type in cancer, and I'm going to take advantage of that adjacency operator. So I'll look for the term cancer within 3 words of cervix. And I think I'm going to use, let's see, let's use a truncation symbol here. So it'll look for both cervix and cervical. And we'll look for that as a text word and in the keyword field. Make sure I put a comma there. They are very precise in Ovid about the syntax. So if you put a comma and you meant to put in a period, it is not going to work. Well, hopefully we've got that right. Click on search. Yep, that looks good. I'm going to do the same thing for HPV. And let's look for HPV vaccine. Let's look for it as a subject heading. All right. Scroll down, and here are my HPV vaccine subject headings. In this case, I'm going to explode it because there is one that's indented beneath it. Exploding is going to choose my subject heading as well as anything indented beneath it. And notice with Ovid MEDLINE, you have to tell it that's what you want it to do. It doesn't make that assumption. So that's just something to keep in mind. Click on continue. Don't need subject headings. And then the final part of this search before we filter is the keyword piece. So we'll just look for HPV, vaccine, going to use a truncating symbol here and look for it as a text word and a keyword. And let's make sure I use a period and a comma. That's the thing that always gets me every time. Comma. Okay, I think that is right. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm ready to make my combinations here. And you can't see all of your search lines at one time. Typically, you have to click on this expand arrow over here. So I'm going to start by combining this uterine cervical cancer, and the one for cancer of the cervix. I could click in these little boxes here to combine them with or, but you also have the option of just typing that information out. So I believe if I or this, it should combine them for me. So let's see. Yes, and that can come in really handy if you've got a long search with like 25 lines, which is actually not that unusual for some complex searches. Clicking in each individual box can take time. So being able to just type that out can be very helpful. So those were our cervical cancer searches. I'm now going to combine the ones for the HPV vaccine. So I check those off. I'm going to use, whoops, I need to use the or. Let's edit that. Okay, so that would just also shows you how you can go about editing a search line by line. So now I need to just combine those together. I have search 1 through 3 for uterine cancer, search 4 and 5 for the vaccine. So let's combine that. And my uterine cancer search, I'll use and. So now I have my final search. And all I would need to do at this point is to add filters. We'll filter by English. If you need additional filters, it's sort of like PubMed where they don't show them to you all at one time. So you can just click on additional filters and then add whatever it is that you need. We're going to go with that age cohort. And let's see. We'll search for systematic reviews, which should be under publication type, not systematic reviews, randomized controlled trials. And we'll look for the last 5 years. And I think that's everything that we wanted to add. So I'll click on limit now. And I have 40 results very similar to what I had in PubMed. So this is basically the same search that I did in PubMed, but just did it in Ovid. And one of the other advantages I wanted to point out was the edit and also the ability to annotate your search. So since it doesn't give you the search terms, knowing exactly what you did on each line could be helpful. So in this case, for this line where I combined all of my information on cervical cancer, I could type in an annotation here that said included or includes cervical cancer results or something to that effect, and annotate any of the areas where it wasn't clear to me exactly what I was doing by looking at the search itself. So let's wrap this up because we're running late on time here. Okay. So I just wanted to remind you of what the major differences were between PubMed and Ovid MEDLINE. Again, when you're searching PubMed, it's going to be a really great interface for a basic search for a scoping search when you're trying to identify a limited number of key resources. On the other hand, Ovid is a great tool when you're doing a very precise or comprehensive search, and it's recommended for structured searches and systematic reviews. Or if you're working on a dissertation or thesis and you're trying to find areas that haven't been covered in the literature, Ovid is a good resource for that as well. I'm going to make sure that I add additional links to this PowerPoint so that you all can access more information about searching Ovid or PubMed as needed. And of course, you can always reach out to me at jhm52@drexel.edu if you have any questions. Thank you very much.